Good evening. I'm really happy we're maybe we'll just take a moment, notice your current experience. Any particular highlights? Any particular sensations? Noticing thoughts. Noticing thoughts. Bigger experience. The bigger experience, body being able to see each other on a screen with light shining out of it. The illuminating quality of our own being and aliveness, that we can know these sounds. So I'm going to paraphrase because I don't actually have the original text in front of me. But I wanted to do a presentation that is a preamble to the sadhana of Mahamudra. Sadhana means daily practice or formulation of practice, a sort of set of instructions that becomes a daily practice, is sometimes translated. It can be many things, but it often has a liturgy or some kind of content or focus, maybe visualization and meditation of some kind. The sadhana of Mahamudra, Mahamudra means the great seal of reality, and that reality is that emptiness, the symbol of basic goodness, and everything is goodness shining out of that basic. So Mahamudra, or Chagya Chimpo in Tibetan, Mahamudra in Sanskrit. In English, it's sometimes said that the Great Seal. So it's really neat seal that's reminding you of the nature of everything. So that's a very profound instruction. So the daily practice of seeing the everything is the reminder of basic goodness could be a really elaborate translation. This practice was something that Trungpa Rinpoche composed or received, you could say. The story goes that he received it in a cave at Taksang Sengye Samdrup, this cave in Bhutan that Padmasambhava wrathful emanation form or practice in. And Trungpa Rinpoche talks about going there and having a very ordinary experience and being kind of and he had hoped it would be more magical, and he felt kind of I don't know, a little depressed. And then halfway through his retreat, suddenly he started really feeling this connection, and he just started dictating, and this entire liturgy or practice came out of him. It's a very powerful thing. I used to do it quite a bit, and then we haven't done it as much lately in the Shambhala community in the last 10 years, but it's still something that's done. And in fact, there's going to be a program coming up in Boston, Shambhala, that Jade may, depending on family situations, but she may co-teacher, be assistant teacher to Carolyn Gimian, who's one of Trungpa Rinpoche's editors, and that would be on the Sadhana Mahamudra. So that will be a very interesting program. Now I'm going to talk about the preamble. This is important. Really cool. Do you know why it's so cool? Because not just because I like it, but it's cool because Trungpa Rinpoche was providing context for why that really were also very connected with Shambhala in general, but why these teachings were needed at this time in the world so terribly. Apologize for not having the text in front of me. Suppose actually I could be a little less lazy and just get it up here. Let me see if I can get it. 1 second. I mean, I will be able to say it, but I don't have to butcher it for you, right? I make no promises here. But I might be able to find it. All right. Okay. So I found some of it anyway. I have some notes. It begins, the preamble to this practice begins and says, "This is the darkest hour of the dark ages." What does that mean? Well, the Kali Yuga is the Sanskrit for dark age or time cycle, time period. To prophecies that date back to 800 AD, talking about a period coming in the future, which is something that we seem to be in. And the Dark Age is marked by an increase in the 5 kleshas, the poisonous emotions of greed and aggression and ignorance, competitiveness, and when these emotions get out of hand, they're actually connected with disrupting the 5 elements. And of course, when they said this thousands years ago, maybe that sounds somewhat magical, but now we know that we have poisoned our 5 elements. We have thrown our global ecosystem out of whack, and we are seeing scientists observe and forecasting great troubles. So isn't it interesting that when the mind is out of whack and when we're out of our ability to work with our own emotions, that our own behaviors start to impact the world and create disorder? Doesn't that make sense? So very logical, right? It's not that actually fantastical at all. It's very causal and simple. The darkest hour of the Dark Age, meaning that, this is a really, really hard time. And there are more aspects to the Dark Age. The life force is diminished. People are more anxious. Time speeds up. The environment the elements are out of whack. The kleshas are out of whack. So there's all these different elements of this degenerate time. But it's said to be a time where, Padmasambhava, one of the great teachers who brought Buddhism to Tibet, he said that even allies will be at cross purposes. And I find this so heartbreaking to see, even amongst Buddhist sanghas, when we deal with difficulties in our own sanghas and challenges around how to relate to our own and interactions. And when we look at those situations and realize them as opportunities for our own compassion and growth, or do we see them as ways to shut down or blame or lose our view? It's complicated. So it said in the Dark Age is that disease, famine, and war increase. And this was a traditional way of talking about how well a politician or king or queen was doing. Is there plague? Is there famine? Is there war? If they're kind of keeping these things at bay, hey, that's pretty good. I mean, I think our standards are a little higher today, maybe, but those are very important basic human conditions for health and well-being and for sanity. And so the next line of this preamble moves into this notion of disease, famine, and warfare are raging like the fierce north wind. So what this is referring to is the north wind is energy, wind. North indicates the karma family, the family of action, the family, you could say, of competitiveness and jealousy and envy and on the other hand, you could say it's wisdom is this all-accomplishing activity, this efficiency, it's often the color green, as you might see in a military often, or money. These are things that naturally have seemed to be connected, or the growth of grass and trees in nature. This sort of incredibly industrious, self-perpetuating energy that can be very positive. It's on the masculine spectrum of the energies, so it tends towards masculinity or even toxic masculinity. And of course, this is what I think this line is referring to. That disease, famine, and war rage because of the toxic masculine tendencies of our patriarchal history. But again, these things don't just refer to people who happen to be male gendered in their body, right? These are cultural habits that infuse and inculcate all of us. And we all find ourselves, regardless of our gender or race or orientation, finding that we become carriers for some of these systemic behaviors and dynamics. That's what a dark age does. It creates difficult conditions for practice. The next part of the preamble says, the jewel-like teaching of insight is fading day by day. Insight is different than peace. A relative peace is just doing our shamatha practice, bringing our mind to the present and sort of chilling out. And in some sense you could say that's very important because it quells the fire of the kleshas, the warfare and intensity of overwhelming poisonous emotions, which create so much havoc in our world. And our dear Ani Pema has shown us so many teachings around why we must work with our own emotions and how to do that. To stay, with them, not repress them, not act them out. And then eventually she guides us to staying with the feeling in an inner way, following the storyline, coming back to the feeling. This second level is connected more with insight. The first instruction is connected more with shamatha, or presence, being present. But just being present or just being relaxed doesn't necessarily guide us out of samsara. Samsara is the meta dark age, the problem of conditioned existence, right? This is a problem that pervades all ages and all times. And it's when we believe in a self and we hold on to that, and then the price we pay for that and the suffering that's generated, it really refers to the Four Noble Truths. So you could say, this is not a fair translation, but you could say, if you wanted a sort of rock and roll translation of the Four Noble Truths, life sucks. That's the first noble truth. It's not the real translation, right? The real translation is, in life there is suffering. But you could say that life is hard, right? You know, life sucks. You know, you could say that's kind of rugged statement. And then, but there's a cause to that. There's a reason. It's not just random, you know, and it's our clinging to a self. And our collective clinging to self creates even more difficult situations. And when everyone in that is irritated and inflamed, then you have a dark age. Do you see the extra samsara of the dark age? It's samsara extra. A trademark, TM. So that's a problem. Harder for people to see each other's goodness. It makes it so that blame and aggression feel justified or necessary. However, the teachings have told us they're never really necessary. It's necessary to relate to things directly and with compassion and with different energies at different times, but not with aggression. So the jewel-like teaching of insight fading day by day refers to the fact that many people do want mindfulness nowadays, but they want it to feel chill. They want it to become more productive. They want to employ mindfulness in service of their company or their job or their bank account. And you know, there's nothing at all wrong with that, but there's nothing that profound about it either. And so I think if you look at the Dharma, it goes a lot deeper than that. It's not just some add-on. It's not an app for your phone. You know, it's the whole thing. It's the whole human condition. It's the way to understand and really be fully, truly who we are and help each other and help ourselves and feel a sense of well-being at the deepest level. So, how is this fading? Well, it's fading in the sense that there's a preference for using teachings or using spiritual technology to benefit the self. Trungpa Rinpoche called this spiritual materialism, right? And so it's a dangerous trend, and it hasn't gone anywhere. It's just changed shapes, changed cultural locations. There is another line in this preamble that says, Lamas are busy going through villages performing little ceremonies for material gain. Now, that sounds very similar to somebody sort of starting up Mindful Inc. and, you know, making money sort of selling cushions and things. And by the way, I love Samadhi cushions, and I love, you know, people who are sharing the Dharma, and even if it is called Mindful Inc. or whatever, that's fine. There's nothing absolutely wrong with that. Trungpa Rinpoche in this line wasn't saying that's a bad thing, but he said, what I think he's pointing to is the system of economics is so oppressive and the materialism is so thick in the Dark Age that it's forcing people who would normally want to spend time deepening and really focusing on inner subtlety and practice and helping each other. It's forcing us on the almighty making a buck. Now, I certainly navigate trying to make a livelihood, you know, and I do make my livelihood currently as a Dharma teacher. I'm very conscious about that fact being actually a way to support my own practice and your practice. So this is not like an orthodox view, like if you make money, you're bad. if you live in poverty, oh, the holy ones that, you know, that's not how it is. That's not the only model. It's okay to be compensated and or given dana, generosity, in exchange for receiving teachings, all of that. But I think what it points to is not so much making fun of people who are trying to make a living, even in service of such a noble thing as sharing meditation. My goodness, that is a good thing, isn't it? But the problem isn't that. It's the problem he's pointing is that not these people are bad, but that the system and the pressure of materialism, which is connected to the north wind that's raging fiercely, right? Remember how it starts with that north wind, that karma activity. Everything, what do you people say, what's the bottom line? Well, it all comes down to the money. Show me the money, or, you know, well, at the end of the day, you know, all these phrases are about time and money. They're about, it's very materialistic, and it's not our innate nature, but it's the culture we're in. it goes on to say, even those with great devotion are beginning to lose heart. I don't know if you have a pulse and you're not concerned right now about our world, we need to have a talk. It's really scary, isn't it? And I'm not a, like, I mean, I have a friend, a dear friend actually, who lives in Nova Scotia, and he started several farms, and he's always been like, well, you know, the end of post-capitalism is coming, and and I want to be ready. And you know, by the way, we should all move there if things go down. Just, you know, don't send me a text though. You're gonna have to come find me. But you're welcome there. I love you, and I want to go there. You know, he's got all these little houses on it, and he has people come help, and he has garden farms, and I mean, he knows how to do it. He also studied with Tom Brown, who's an indigenous wisdom holder of living, and so he knows how to live and build huts and live in the woods and everything. And that's when I met him as a teenager. He's also the person who introduced me to the Dharma. He taught me to meditate first. So homage to you, David Greenberg, my dear friend, who I also forgot to call tonight while I was in my revelries tonight and making you wait. So that's for the record. I'm got a lot going on in my little world, so I apologize for that. But all of this is to say that even if you're not a sort of transition town slash, you know, apocalypse preparer person, it just even if you're sort of hoping that we can kind of right this ship of our modern world and our relationship to each other and the environment, it is a time where even beings with great conviction in human goodness are beginning to become disheartened. And I also want to talk about this in terms of spiritual community that, you know, obviously I emerged from in Shambhala, where, you know, there's great pain around the Me Too movement sweeping through the community. You know, my own situation, the situation of many people in our community, the situation with the Sakyong, all of us are in this web and this social conscience of trying to figure out how do we grow and heal and include our humanity, our imperfections. How do we bring out the best in each other? How do we accomplish the Dharma together, not bring each other down, and not fixate on our negative qualities, but also not ignore situations that need to change? And so it's a very tumultuous time, but that's like a grain of sand compared to the pain and intensity that's going on in our world. And we know this. You know, and I was talking about this with Jade last night. She said, you know, we're having a family health issue with her father-in-law, has family health issue right now. I mean, my father-in-law, sorry, her father. We have the Shambhala community tumult and all of that going on. And yet, what she said to me last night is, yeah, but you know, there's an even bigger thing going on, which is this feeling in our world right now. And she cited those reports on climate change that are now forecasting a new accelerated timetable for disruption, mass migration, and challenges coming our way. So the final line of this preamble, or the final section of it, so enable to individuals to renew spiritual strength, I have written this sadhana. And I would say that line is not just about the sadhana Mahamudra, but in order to enable individuals to renew spiritual strength also refers to the entire Shambhala Dharma and tradition. And this whole idea of, in this darkest hour of the Dark Age, we need special technology. We need special help, you could say. And it's not any different than the classic Dharma. But I think what Trungpa Rinpoche really did is he translated the Dharma culturally, not just from Tibetan to English, but he studied English culture, our Western culture, modern culture. He studied the English language, English Western philosophy. So what he was able to do was to translate an entire culture. And he called himself, personally, he said, I'm a time traveler. Why did he say that? He didn't mean literally like he'd moved, but he said he came from the Bronze Age to the Space Age within a few years, right? That's unbelievable. And so to think of that transition, to think of the cultural, think of the culture shock you get when you go to just even another country. Or even just a different part of your own country, or even your own state, another town. Imagine going from the Bronze Age to the Space Age, let alone the entirely different language and cultural history. So bringing the wisdom of the East to the West at a time where the West has really, you could say, overdone materialism. And that's really the big problem and thrust of the sadhana of Mahamudra is addressing. There's a line in it that says, even though I stumble in the thick black fog of materialism, I still aspire to see it. Oh, I love that line so much. Though I stumble in the thick black fog of materialism, I still aspire to see it. What does he aspire to see, or for us to see, is the true basic goodness of all humanity, our true nature. So when I was reading this preamble a couple months ago, I was like, oh my God, this was about now, like right now. It was written in 1968, but it was like, oh, this is more relevant now than it was even then. How interesting. So this is said to be a quality of a tertun, a treasure revealer, someone who reveals timely teachings, otherwise known as terma. Those timely teachings are meant to unpack the teachings, the same old stuff, right? It's all the same stuff, but it's repackaged to come through to us and include our cultural conditioning, challenges, and interests in a way that allows us to go deeper. I also feel like all of us are terdak. Terdak are those terma, the traditional, the visionary teachings that are appropriate for the moment, the way of interpreting the teachings that help us right now. And terdak is those who unpack that or give commentary on that or make it accessible. The Tsakyong has been I think there's a special name like for that, something like Seme Terdak or something. It means like the big head honcho, something like that. That is, yes, that's certainly been his role. But for all of us, in some sense, we're doing that work. We're trying to figure out, how does Dharma live right now in our lives, in our world, in our life as it intersects with this moment in the world. And when I think about this preamble and the teachings that are contained within it, it's almost like saying it's not your fault. If it's really hard, if you feel discouraged, if you feel overwhelmed, if you are kind of shocked by how hard things are right now, it's not you. Which is really weird, because most of the Dharma is saying the exact opposite. It's like saying, by the way, it's you. It's your fault. Like, if you're suffering, it's you. It's not me, it's you. And that's true for all of us. It's me. It's me, right? It's always me. I'm working with my mind. What do I project on the world? What do I tell the world it is? What do I confuse? And one of the things we do is we project our thoughts onto the world, and then we confuse our projection with the real world. We can't quite see the difference anymore, and we start to believe our own story. This is the opposite of what Ani Pema told us at the level of insight, which is to stay with the feeling, drop, or let go of the storyline, come back to the raw feeling. That's insight. That's the jewel. The jewel gives us not only responsibility, but empowerment. What happens when you blame something outside of you? You disempower the locus of control onto an outer object. You say, that has done this to me. Now, there's some truth in that, but the deeper truth is, I'm responsible for the way I work with this. Now, that hasn't changed in the Dark Age. So that's very interesting. But as we've noticed, because the collective conditions have gotten more difficult, when I say it's not you, what I mean to say is it's bigger than us. It's harder now than even ordinary samsara, as I was saying before. This is samsara extra. So it's important to know that and not take it personally, right? Because we're left with our own personal instrument of perception. We assess how we're doing and how the world is based on our own inner practice and relationship with our sense perceptions and our mind. That's good stuff. And it's so important to realize that we're not alone in feeling the challenge of this moment. All of that is to say that knowing that allows us to relax a little, ideally, but then ultimately we do come back for our own mind, our own body, our own speech. These three gates are our responsibility. What I think, what comes out of my mouth and what comes out of my body in actions, that's my responsibility. I'm responsible for that karmic chain. And the ideal is that through my practice, I notice at the level of mind thoughts. I don't fight with them and create more karma. I see them as thoughts, as little dreams. Why fight in a dream when it's a dream? If you're dreaming and you know it's a dream, why continue to fight a war in a dream? Pointless. Capiche? That's important. Khenpo Rinpoche said the greatest, my first teacher, the greatest siddhi or accomplishment there is the siddhi of lucidity. In other words, people would say, oh, I had a dream and I flew and he had a dream I walked through a wall. And he said, oh, that's wonderful. But were you lucid? And if you're not lucid, so what if you walk through a wall in a dream? So what if you have 6 heads? You weren't aware of the reality that you're in. You don't know what's happening. So the idea is to actually have this insight, lucidity, same thing. And then from that, you don't need to fight with your mind, right? You don't need to do that. You can. You might have a little attachment, say, no, but I just want to finish and I want to just going to do this one last thing and I'm going to, and that's samsara, right? Just one more, as the Sakyong said, just one more. Even when you know better, okay, but just one more, just one. And I find this in myself is very funny, right? We know better, but then we're like, yeah, but no one's looking. I'll just do one more. Just one more game. And it's that addictive, attached quality that is kinetic. It's energetic. We get sucked in and we do it, and then afterwards we feel more tight and frustrated. And there's never one more that's going to work. By the way, even if you win the game, you want to win again. If you lose, you want to win. So it's just endless, and that's samsara, right? But when you have a device, like those, it's not a phone, it's a coaster, but I'll pretend. When you have a device like this that's supposed to augment your attachment to the degree where you can always be like doing just one more, hold on, just one more, just one more. And then that becomes your life, just one more, just one more. And finally, the mantra of just one more is so continuous, you don't even have to say it. You have siddhi in just one moreness. And so now you don't even have to practice. It's just one more, just one more, just one more. You don't even know. This is said to be the highest level of Shenpa, the mind fixating. There's 4 levels. The highest level of Shenpa is you don't even know you're hooked. You're so used to being hooked. It's like a fish in water. Shenpa, the one that Ani Pema talks about often, is the one where you just really have to have one more and you can't help yourself, right? But the next level beyond that is continuously immersed in that, so you don't even question. You're so native to that state of mind that you keep going, and that's very sad. that is not a practitioner's state of mind, because in that kind of complete dream, you don't know you're dreaming, right? So you're lost. So as we come out of the intensity of attachment or Shenpa, we come to subtler and subtler levels. The third level of just one more, we can notice that. That's very good. We feel ourselves tightening, and that actually gives us feedback that's workable. The level before that of just like having an impulse and kind of, maybe you don't act on it, right? But it comes up. And then the level before that is just labeling things. Conceptually, just sort of bird, just holding the mind to an object and trying to like even place it is the subtlest level. None of this is a problem if there's insight, if we're lucid, if we know that it's happening, if we realize the aliveness in us is seeing the aliveness in what is happening. So at the mental level, when we see these things, that's working with the mental gate. We can see, and everything can be freed right there. It's called self-liberation. Things can see themselves at the level of basic goodness of mind. At the level of speech, if we don't see our thoughts, or they don't see themselves in this spacious awareness, or we get caught in things, then often we start saying stuff, or we think things we don't catch, and then they start to become words we say. And then the words we say have impact and karma, and then maybe if we don't notice our words and the impact, then we start doing things, whether it's grabbing or hitting or stealing or taking one more Twinkie. I don't know if they make Twinkies anymore. There's some debate about that. But so there are these three gates: mind, speech, body, or body, speech, mind in the Asian tradition. These three gates are actually how we work with our own practice and our own relationships to others. Of course, it's true that others and society influences us and affect us, but at the end of the day, our power source, our capacity to help society and ourselves is taking responsibility for these three gates. And what helps us take responsibility for them in practical action is the Dharma, the teachings, and having the view. If we don't have the view, you can't do the practice. If you have the view, then you can do the practice. So, it feels like to me that I wanted to share this with you because it can be shocking sometimes to realize how hard it is to follow this path. It can be shocking sometimes to realize how challenging it is to be a human, just period. Dying is not necessarily easy. May it be easy for everyone, but often it's not. Living may be easy for everyone. Often it's not. We get caught. We feel overwhelmed. We feel confused. We feel lonely. We feel disheartened. And especially this disheartenment, there's two levels to this. One is the outer perception of it's fair enough. One, like I was saying earlier, almost like one should be. Should is always a questionable word. Don't should on anyone. But that said, one could very well understand being disheartened by our world right now. It would make plenty of sense. But then there's a kind of disheartenment that comes from how we're working with our own mind. And that one's never that helpful. In the way that Trungpa Rinpoche talked about these two different things was he said, negativity is fine. Double negativity is a problem. And he defined it this way. And I think he shared this specifically because it was the 70s and there was a lot of positive thinking. There still is, right? The new age, like just manifest a Ferrari, you think your way into good karma. And it's like, what? But that is a thing that people feel like, let's be positive. Just think positive thoughts. Suppress those negative ones, only positive ones. Like that's a very binary approach to working with the mind, and it doesn't usually go that well. or eventually it falls apart for many people. It's kind of a holding pattern. Maybe it works, maybe, but it's kind of paranoid. And then there's the more profound dharmic approach, which is based on insight, right? It's not just, I need good feelings and no bad feelings. That's very materialistic. That's very earthly, very like face value. But the deeper understanding of this user system here, or the consciousness, you know, how do you be a human, is that, oh, wait, negative and positive thoughts are happening in a bigger space of awareness. Can I see them for what they are? Negativity is natural. When we are disheartened or depressed by what we see, that's good. I know that's kind of oxymoronic, but you know what I mean. It's as the Sakyong has said, it's bad good. There's good good and bad good. And what he meant is that both good and bad are fundamentally workable in the mind of compassion. Staying with the feeling, dropping the storm. You can have a bad feeling, and my goodness, isn't that good that we can feel something bad? It'd be like one of those robots, like, I don't feel sadness. I am sorry you are crying. I will wait till you're done. You know, it's like, that wouldn't be very helpful, very compassionate. So it's important that we can feel the full spectrum of feelings and emotions. Double negativity is not just the sensitivity or disheartenment. It's because of that, now I'm going to say everything sucks because it sucks. Now that's going too far. That's when we start to fixate on the feeling and tell a story. And if we go back to Anipema, it sucks is the feeling, and it sucks that it sucks is the storyline. Right? You can't have a sucks that it sucks without a sucks. And if you have a sucks, that's enough. And if you start saying, well, but it sucks that it's like, well, that's just a thought. Feel it, notice it, and that's just that. And then if there's another thought about that, oh, notice that. And at some point, this is what we say is working with the second arrow, and actually seeing through our judging mind as not really our ally. It's not the way to protect ourselves. It's not the way to ensure pro-social behavior. It's not how we make sure we're ethical even. We will make mistakes as human beings. I hope all of us do. And when we make mistakes and cause impact that is harmful to ourselves and others, may we be redemptive. May we integrate and learn from those things. That's the path that we're on together. This is not a path of you cannot have negativity. You cannot have a mistake. That is not a real path in Buddhism. Buddhism is a redemptive tradition. It's a tradition which says Milarepa, who killed people, is probably one of the most inspiring practitioners in all of the Tibetan pantheon. Why is that? I think it's the same reason that Trungpa Rinpoche is so inspiring to so many people, because of the humanity of it, that we can all relate to the parts of ourselves that are confused or that cause harm or that have not been in full alignment. And then because that we don't shut down on that, we can grow and learn. That is a redemptive tradition, a tradition that is empowering. So I think that's mostly what I want to say. And maybe for the next, if you still have time, another 20 minutes, because I was a little late. You sat. You don't have to stay the whole time if you don't want. But I want to just leave some room for more dialogue. I did want to present this because it's been on my mind and heart. And I am concerned of just each of us in a time where things are really difficult. It's okay to feel disheartened and frustrated. It's also really important to see when that starts to become a story. And what I love about practice so much is that it gives us an opportunity to have a lucid dream at any moment and go, oh, this is the little story I'm telling you. So what is now? What is this? Ah, so much freedom, so much aliveness, so much space, so much openness is available to us at any moment. So, yeah, I know I've said a lot of themes, but I'm so curious, even if what you're feeling and thinking is completely left field to what I've been saying, let the games begin. Share what you want. It's totally open, right?
So pretty much the whole time that you've been talking, Nick, I've been thinking about a program that I'm doing this coming weekend, which may or may not lead to me stepping into sort of a new role at the center. But even if it doesn't, it's around specifically working with difficult situations and being able to intervene in a way that's helpful and not harmful. So as I'm reading the text for the program, it's talking about some of the the pith instructions for how we might do this, and there's letting go of the storyline and giving up hope of an outcome, and as I'm reading, I'm thinking, well, that doesn't mean the storyline about, but we have to hope for this outcome. And there's this little voice of Janet, all storylines, all outcomes, let it go. And part of me, just as you were saying, like, this is like the darkest hour of the dark age, right? Like, why do I want to do this now? And that's probably a valid question. But the other part of that is, in order to be able to do that, to intervene in a situation that involves another person or other people, I have to be able to work with my own heart and mind. And so, which kind of goes back to what you were saying too about it is me. Because just by stepping into a situation, it changes, right? So I want to be in the best form when I step into that situation. So I'm letting go of all my storylines.
I love it. I love what you're sharing, because also for me, it's like giving up a storyline sounds good on paper, but the actual experience is like, no, wait, but this one, but that feels like actually that's doing something for me though right now. Like it kind of, oh, it's a little scary to not have it. So it's like very personal. This is not a theoretical thing.
Not theoretical at all.
Storylines aren't just like the bad stuff. Get rid of it.
I feel like storylines give me ground, and when I was talking to you earlier, Nick, about when I was headed over to this Burr Oak to be at this place where the friend of mine was, and how I was wouldn't not let the storyline go, and it's very difficult, but it's also groundless, because it's like, then where do I land? Where am I? And so then I made up my own storyline of look at the cows, look at the and things that didn't have anything to do with what my mind was trying to do, was scare me, and what about this, and what's going to happen to this, and so I could kind of drown all that out. But when I don't have a storyline, that to me is very groundless.
It is, isn't it? And groundless is not just like this theoretical word. It's like terror and a feeling of not okay, or I'm not okay, or even if I think I'm panicking and I'm like beginning to have a panic attack or something, I don't want to be panicked, but I am, right? It's not theoretical. It's like I'm feeling like, and if I try to fight being panicked, well, then a panic attack goes to like Mach 12. Then it's like, oh, good, just the fertile ground I was looking for. It's like, so I feel like when I feel panic coming up, it's like, oh, I guess I have to embrace this. But there is a real price there. It's not just like happy, perfectly, oh, why didn't I think of that? It's not, oh, shucks, it's more like, oh no, You know, so it's very, I love these teachings so much. And I think sometimes in our culture, when we hear them, we think like the good thing is being lucid and spacious, and the bad thing is being scared and fighting, you know, tense. And I know that's not what the teachings really mean. I know that's not true. It's all the same space we're in. It's all life. It's all workable. And we're not preferring, actually. The way we feel lucid and spacious is by surrendering into being with exactly what is, nakedly. It's not about editing it or making it different. And so it's very raw. Yeah.
It's almost like there's so much space, you just need to fill it. You know, when you're just sitting there with whatever, it's like that's, you know, then where's the guts of this? You know, you wanna put something there, kind of a thing. Yeah, you want to fill up that space because it's not comfortable. We're not used to it.
Yes, that is right. So deeply in us, like, oh, I don't know what's going to happen next, and I feel a little apprehension, or that's natural, that's good, that's healthy, that should happen, right? It should, but it does. And then once it's there, it's like, okay, how do I work with this, right? It's not a repression. You know, the classic quote from Gampopa: when you no longer fixate upon nor repress whatever arises in your mind is no other than the Buddha. You know, that is the whole path. But it turns out that's not so easy to do. It takes all we've got. And it takes learning about, well, how am I repressing that I didn't even know I was? You know, the repressing that we do back here is called a blind spot, right? We're like, what do you mean? What repressing? I don't even see anything. I don't know what you're talking about. You know, so it's like, that's why we need to work together, is, you know, help each other see things we couldn't only rely on our own reference point, you know. So I've found that so helpful on my path. Yes.
Nick, the Sadhana of Mahamudra. So is it just an explanation of, or a way of describing a view, or is there also an actual practice that
yes.
pertains to that?
Yes, there's an actual practice, and it has a lot of view. And it starts out with this beautiful stanza on refuge. You know, taking refuge. It's done in a very brilliant way, you know, that's very spacious, very uplifted. And then, you know, there's often a refuge, a sense of remembering bodhicitta. So there's kind of like a formulaic sections to sadhanas. They all follow these sort of formulas. It's almost like best practices from practitioners of yore, you know. Like, what if, it's like if some great meditator wrote down, like, well, then I did this, and yeah, I always thought of that, and yeah, often I would do this, and this would come up, and then they wrote it all out for you, and you're like, thank you for the map, now I don't have to reinvent the wheel, right? So that's the idea of a sadhana. In a sadhana, there's often liturgy, so chanting, or things that initially you would chant and read, but maybe eventually even memorize to some degree, but you get familiar with it. And that's great because it gets in your subconscious gossip and becomes part of your, the way you think about the world. You know, it comes to you in funny moments. The other thing that's helpful is there's an element of visualization. When you're reading the sadhana, there's different things you might be imagining or seeing. So I like the word sensualization because it's a little more full. It's like you might be hearing, seeing, imagining, using your imagination in an enlightened and meditative way. And then finally, there's a use of mantra, or some repetition of phrases or sounds that are automatopoeic, you know, that, like in this one, it's hum. You repeat hum, 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 and you imagine all this sort of rainbow light and blossoms falling, and there's no here or there, and you hum, 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 hum. And as you do this, it said you're merging with the mind of the blessings of all the siddhas, all the accomplished ones of the past. So this is a very beautiful practice that has all these different elements, and this is very common to Vajrayana methodology, right? To have these different elements brought together. There are also periods of just silent sitting meditation as well.
Is this something that we can learn about from reading, or is it something that's
That's a good question. You know, usually it's offered at a Shambhala center, and it's done on the full and new moons if it is, or on special occasions like the weekend I mentioned in Boston. I don't imagine you'll come up, but if you want to come up, you could stay with us so and check that out. But that would be one way to start connecting with it. But yeah, if you want to learn more about it, maybe you and I could talk one-on-one. And I don't know what the situation is. If you don't have any access, maybe we can make some exception and you could get access to it somehow and see it, or we could do it together. Maybe we could do it together one time. That would be a great way to connect with it too. So we can also do that. Yeah.
I actually know of a couple of resources, Nick.
Oh, great.
Yeah, the sadhana is of Mahamudra is practiced regularly through Ocean. It's the Chronicles of Chogyam Trungpa, and I can get the link so that people.
Oh, great.
Yeah, and I think Reggie Ray also has a book.
Oh my gosh! So it's out there, and
yeah.
Okay. And you know, I that's so cool. And maybe we could do it together sometime too. That'd be fun. Yeah. Does that help, Stephen? Do you feel like you know what you're, yeah, good.
Thanks for the exploration of the Dark Age.
You're welcome, Phil.
It's not necessarily something we, to dwell on too much, but it's another bad good, right?
Right.
But it sort of, it kind of points to, it's very helpful because it kind of underlines or points to just this kind of desire I continue to have to contemplate our collective suffering, and to bring that more into my practice, instead of not completely replacing, but more balancing out the me suffering.
Yeah.
And I think what I'm noticing is that the more balance I have between the me suffering and the us suffering, it's making me think a little more deeply about what suffering is, and what is my particular sweet spot with suffering. I guess everybody has perhaps their own, and I've noticed that the more I kind of hear the me suffering in the teachings, the more alone I feel, actually, and the more I hear the we suffering, the more it's a double-edged sword. It's kind of like the more I feel relieved, but at the same time, the more I feel kind of overwhelmed.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I think it reminded me of something that has come up recently, of the situation that I don't know. I found myself in my life from time to time in a romantic relationship that breaks up.
Yeah.
And there's often that conversation where the two of us are kind of on different levels. You know, one person's thinking, you know, what is the me path now, and the other person's thinking, what about us? What about us? You can't do that. You cannot go on the me path because there's us.
Yeah.
And so there's that pain in that the us is kind of lost. And so that kind of suffering of the us is something that I'd like to get more in touch with. And I find that it's not that easy with the teachings as a newcomer to the teachings, because it's kind of somewhat ambiguous in terms of the way that things are laid out. Is the suffering both the me suffering or the us suffering or the we suffering, or is it you know, I wish there was more guidance or more balance or more clarity around the me and the us in our suffering.
Oh, I love that. It's really juicy. Do you have a few minutes more to explore? Because one thing I thought, okay, if you want to go, that's fine. I want to do a little drawing here because you got me inspired. I don't know. Can you see this? Okay. So here is a very bad graph there. This over here is like the total we zone, right? And over here is the total me zone. And if what the teachings say is we've been overemphasizing ourselves towards the me plan, right? We've been identifying with our own senses and our own suffering, and it's gotten overdone, overblown. And so what the Mahayana teachings say is turn that frown around or upside down. And it's look at we, and it's in the big teachings exchanging self for other, right? So we're exchanging self for other. This is like Coach Nick right now. We got X's over here. Oh, no, I'm just kidding. Sorry. But you can see that the self is here in the me plan, and other is over here. Now, what happens in an unhealthy dynamic is that we get we head out in towards the we territory, and we sort of forget about ourselves, and we get so lodged in others that we're actually acting out and demanding all of these shadow needs we have about our own needs and our own heart, but we're doing it in an external way. And so we need to feel helpful. It's codependency or idiot compassion. We need to help people feel good so we feel good, you know, and that can get out of hand. However, because the teachings tell us we have this huge overemphasis on self, that when we turn it outward, that's really helpful. Now, the challenge is, in our culture, we didn't grow up in a collectivist culture. We grew up in an individualistic culture in the West, right? And so what's tricky is if we don't have a healthy sense of self and we head out to others, we get that shadow problem. But on the other hand, when somebody else is suffering, sometimes that radiates, and this whole thing is a shared space. As you can see, it's one blank board. And that suffering radiates. And when we can resonate with that, we can then send back resonation with them. And both people feel this sort of non-duality in the middle. This sense of self and other are actually interdependent. They're not separate. somebody's emotion might be coming into my experience, but once it's here, it's mine. And the same thing with mine. Once I'm radiating something out, it's no longer mine, it's theirs. But the responsibility is in how do we work with this we space or shared space? How do we create a space that is balanced, like you were saying? I don't know. I think that's what the teachings are definitely asking us to look at, right? And one of the things that I get excited about is by understanding my own reactions and my own sort of projections. You know, if somebody does something and I get irritated, what does that say about parts of myself that I'm not examining, or the shadow parts of myself that I'm not relating to? Oh, I can't stand it when so-and-so does X. What about that can't I stand, right? And often when there's one finger pointing out, there's three pointing back, right? That's the old saying. And the idea there is by looking at our own mind, yes, it can be lonely and we can feel, you know, it can go too far where we get kind of lost in our own processing our process. But if we look in and see how we're feeling and what's going on in us, we have insights about, oh my gosh. Or maybe someone helps us where we're working with someone outside and they say, you're doing this thing. You're like, what thing? This hand? No, which hand? This one? You're like, both hands. Oh, all right, fine. You know, and when we feel seen by another person, we really do learn a lot about ourselves. And this is why a lot of what we've been working with here is also social meditation, which is a form of creating a we space and learning about our impact, learning about what I want to say, and then seeing how it interacts and listening and learning how it feels to just listen and not have an answer. And practicing these things we never get to practice. Social meditation is really one of the ways that we start to learn about this interdependence of self and other. And what we find is there's a social emotion, an emotional thing that can happen that it doesn't matter whose emotion it is. The cat's out of the bag. It's like, it's not, whose tree is it? It's like, no, they're trees. They don't belong to anyone. They happen. Am I responsible for my own mind? Well, let's get really precise. Who is responsible for what? And when we really look deeply, you know, and Sherry and I were talking about this earlier today, this question of who's meditating? Who's getting angry? When we look at that in an introspective way, we often find that there's a kind of clear space that there's not some solid thing that's having this feeling. There's not some solid me that's meditating. But somehow we're so used to looking out and focusing on what we want out there to make this feel different. And now we're flipping the whole thing out. We're looking in here to see what's really here so that we can actually focus on being out there in a way that's unified. Isn't that bizarre? Does that make any sense what I just said? We're so in other words, one way of looking at it is we're always looking at ourselves. We're addicted to being happy for me. But the we, actually, when we look in and see who is this person that wants me to be happy, it falls apart. There's not some solid me. And when we look in, we actually feel more a part of what's out there. Kalu Rinpoche says it very beautifully. And this is a great summary. I've said this before, I've shared this before, but it's a beautiful stanza that helps sum up the path. We live in illusion and the appearance of things. There is a reality, and we are that reality. We. When we realize this, we realize we are nothing. And in being nothing, we are everything. That is all. Wow. That cat summed up the Dharma in one paragraph, and he did a damn good job. So, whoa, that stanza, I mean, we could study that for the rest of our lives. But I think it says these things that you're pointing to, Phil, which is how do we make introspection a social, pro-social activity. And that's a real koan that we have to live through together. And I'm so into it with you. I'm like, I'm right with you. I think there's this perfect question, and there's no simple answer, but I just wanted to share all that gobbledygook to share that I'm in it with you.
And we can practice on Wednesday nights.
Indeed, the we space. Yeah. Okay. Thank you so much for your patience. Sorry I was late again. I'm so glad you were sitting though. I can't tell you how much that charges up my heart fire to come in and see you all just sitting. It's like, yes, that's amazing. I love you. Maybe we'll end the bow.